Welcome, my friends, to the Generations broadcast. My name is Kevin Swanson. I'm a homeschool father of 5, and I believe that homeschooling is a great way to restore a biblical concept of education. It may not happen in every case, but we do encourage people to restore relationships, reintegrate the family, involve parents in the raising of children. This seems to be what God intends in His Word. If you look at all 66 books, you find that the Bible presents parents raising children. I understand that Rousseau and Marx and Plato disagreed. I understand that Plato said that no man should know his son and no son shall know his father. I know that's in Plato's Republic, but I'm telling you that Plato was wrong. And I understand that Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Karl Marx and others picked up the worldview of getting kids away from the parents and passing them on to the state to be sure that the state raises the children to make for better citizens. I understand that's the socialist Marxist worldview, but it doesn't have to be our worldview. We can maintain a distinctively Christian social worldview, and I encourage people to do so. Well, the battle of worldviews is working its way into the courts in places like Germany, and Dave, the Wunderlich family is an excellent example of a family who has been through an amazing amount of persecution. One of the last Christian families alive in Germany that's still in Germany trying to hang on to something of a Christian education for their children. Instead of getting their children into mandated sex education programs at 6 years of age in German public schools, they exempted themselves from this and tried to homeschool in Germany. They're persecuted out of Germany, worked their way through at least 6 other nations, including Norway, France, etc., were chased out of most of these. The French social workers grabbed the kids when they were in France. They had a hard time getting work there, made it back to Germany, and apparently a neighbor turned them in within about 6 months. And here it is. Here's the latest story from WorldNet Daily just an hour ago. Here it is. Just as a German family has been reunited after the children were seized in a SWAT-style police raid because they were homeschooled, a prosecutor in another case is demanding 6 months jail terms for parents who want to educate their children. This, again, is WorldNet Daily reporting from Germany. The 4 children of Dirk and Petra Wunderlich were forcibly taken by a team of about 20 armed law enforcement officers from their home just as their homeschool classes were beginning. The shocking raid was made solely because the parents were providing their children's education per HSLDA, the world's premier advocate for homeschooling. HSLDA officials confirmed Thursday to WorldNet Daily that the children were reunited with their parents after the family, given no choice, agreed to send their children to a government-approved education program. Apparently, Dave, they're going to send their kids back to the state schools, and the authorities are going to allow them to have their children at home in the meantime. So it's a sad case. At the same time, let me say, there is yet another family in trouble. Thomas and Marit Schaum family are facing criminal charges over homeschooling in Germany. The prosecutor is demanding parents go to jail for 6 months. Now, we're going to interview Mike Donnelly in just a moment to get an update on what's going on in Germany and throughout Europe right now. He's been back and forth from Europe a couple of times in the last few months. Mike Donnelly is a good man, a man who is fighting tooth and nail for some degree of freedom in the Western world. And as we said before, friends, you can take away a person's right to attend church. You can take away a person's right to own guns. You can take away a person's right to this or that, but you take away the freedom to raise your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord per Deuteronomy 6:7. And now you're talking about one of the most precious freedoms, probably the most precious freedom available on planet Earth. When you violate the family jurisdiction, you're breaking down everything. Family, church, everything. And of course, you're breaking down the civilization as well. And friends, because there are families that have ceased to be families, because families no longer are responsible for raising children in the postmodern world, we're seeing the breakdown of civilizations everywhere. People are not having children, birth implosions everywhere. Civilizations will not be the same because of what the secularists are doing and because the secularists are persecuting the last few functional families left in Germany.
Turns about the tolerant secularists are very intolerant of the non-secularists.
Yeah.
I think it's fairly obvious as we look at what's happening in Europe and what's happening in this country. Remember, the Romeike family is threatened with deportation because they're not here for a good enough reason other than their children will be taken away if they continue to homeschool.
Yeah, and this
country.
I think is informative to that case. And Dave, I don't know if HSLDA is pressing this. I may ask Mike Donnelly this question, but because of all the persecution that's happening to homeschooling families in Germany right now, you would think that the United States State Department would think differently concerning the Romeike case.
You would think. But then you would also think that America's State Department stood for things that were important, like liberty And I'm not sure we can say that right now. We can be a little skeptical about what's happening in our own political situation in our own landscape here. It does not look like the State Department really cares about things like life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness around the world, or justice, or the ability to raise your children, or any kind of Christian virtue whatsoever. But Mike Donnelly does, HSLDA does, and you and I do. And maybe we can start with that. Look, if we can just get a couple Americans to love their kids this much, that would be good.
Yep, it would be. I think it's a good lesson for all of us to put the family first and to fight for freedom, to fight for the faith of our kids, our families. Because, friends, you send them to the indoctrination centers and indoctrinate them in the wrong worldview and the wrong metaphysic, a naturalistic, materialistic, non-supernatural metaphysic, which is very, 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 very common in the public schools, where they are taught systematically not to fear God in every single classroom. Okay? You're probably going to lose your children. This happens to the majority of them. Now, granted, from time to time, some will be saved. Dave, I don't know what the Wunderlichs are going to do. Maybe they're going to send their kids to the state schools for a little while and try to get out of the country. Maybe they can escape to Saudi Arabia. Maybe they'll do better in Saudi Arabia.
I think you can homeschool in Saudi Arabia.
I think you can, yeah.
You might have to be under Sharia law, but
yeah.
I think you might be able to. You might be able to in South Africa. You might be able to in lots of places where you don't have work.
Russia. I don't know why they don't go to Russia. I mean, it's ironic. What used to be communist is now a fair amount of freedom. In fact, we're heading to Russia in about 5 to 6 months for the very first homeschooling conference in St. Petersburg, I believe. I believe that's happening in March of 2014. A homeschooling conference in St. Petersburg. Maybe the Wunderlichs will be there. I think they ought to escape. I think if they persecute you in one city, Jesus says, flee to the next and flee to the next. And I think this is going to have to happen with these poor families in places like Germany. And Dave, before we're taking the break, and we're going to move off to Mike Donnelly in a moment, I think Germany makes sense as being one of the most persecuting nations in all the world. Germany has always been one of the very worst nations in terms of worldviews. Karl Marx, of course, comes from there. The Prussian tyranny, the very first compulsory attendance laws, came out of Prussia, came out of Germany. Germany was really the first nation to really try to socialize the entire nation and to bring about a massive socialist tyranny. And they were successful, finally, with Hitler and the Nazis. They were one of the most successful of the totalitarian nations, and they're still working on that. And Dave, the roots of this date all the way back to Martin Luther. Now, I like Martin Luther in many ways, but I've been doing some research on education that comes out of the Reformation. The Reformers were not sterling in their approach to education. They did not, I believe, they were not super faithful to the Word of God in how they handled education. They didn't really take into account the church fathers in the area of education. I think it would have been helpful if they had done this. But here's what Martin Luther said in a letter to the leaders. I believe this is the letter to the leaders at that time. He writes, "The right instruction of youth is a matter in which Christ and all the world are concerned. Thereby we are all aided, and consider that great Christian zeal is needed to overcome the silent, secret, and artful machinations of the devil. If we must annually expend large sums of muskets, roads, bridges, dams, and the like, in order that the city may have temporal peace and comfort, why should we not apply as much to our poor neglected youth in order that we may have a skillful schoolmaster or two?" So he was one of the very first men who argued for public funding of education, as I said there in that letter to the outermen and the city officials, the mayors of the nation of Germany at that time. Martin Luther at the forefront of the compulsory attendance laws and at the forefront of public funding of education in the 1500s, and planting some seeds that would not yield good fruit in the future. Now, at that time, of course, he was handing education over to the state, but the state was still under control of the church and the confessions of the church. Little did he know that he was setting up the world for the state eventually to take total control over the family and total control over all things and become socialist and atheistic, and then at that point would begin to persecute poor families like the Wunderlich family. I don't think Luther would have been able to see ahead some of the implications of his policies at that time, but of course we all make mistakes.
And there was a time and a place where you need to have a scaffolding in order to support a structure until that structure is built and in place. In an age when illiteracy is the characteristic of most of the farmers and the people, in order to have a generation that's literate, that can read the Word of God, you might think that's a pragmatic way of going. Yeah. And I'm not here to defend Luther, but I am just saying that I'm going to honor those great men who gave us the Reformation, and there's still reforming to be done.
I would much rather have illiteracy than tyranny and socialist control of education. However, the churches probably ought to step in and engage this. But of course, the problem with the Lutheran German Church and the Anglican Church and was that they were under state funding and control of the church, and that, of course, was one of the Achilles' heel for the entire Christian world coming out of the 16th and 17th centuries. All right, my friends. Well, history has taught us some valuable lessons, and it always does. And hopefully we will learn from history and not repeat some of these mistakes. Be back in just a moment with an important interview with Mike Donnelly. We're going to be hitting the phones and finding out what's going on in the German tyranny in just a moment. We are back on the Generations Radio broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host with you, homeschool father of 5, and concerned about what's happening with homeschooling families in Germany today on this edition of the program. And we have updated folks on these issues for many, many years, whether it be Sweden, England, or Germany. Friends, there are serious, serious issues in terms of parental freedoms in Europe today. And we want to talk about the Wunderlich family one more time. And right now we're going to go to Homeschool Legal Defense Association attorney Mike Donnelly, who's had extensive experience working with Germany, and he's been out there a number of times recently. So we want to catch up on what's happening there with Mike. Hey, Mike, welcome back to our program.
It's great to be with you, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me and for your interest and support of our cause.
Yeah, and Mike, you've been to Germany a number of times recently, haven't you?
Yeah, I just got back on Sunday of this week, and was over there meeting with attorneys from all over Europe as well as with German homeschool leaders to try to talk about the situation for homeschoolers in Europe, but also in Germany.
Is there anything like a legal defense association for homeschooling, or is there something of a preparatory work being done to fight for parental freedoms in Europe right now?
Yeah, there are a number of organizations that are sort of getting started. There was an organization in Germany that has been working over the years to try to advance this cause, and it's just been a really, really tough battle. But I'm very encouraged by the new faces that I'm seeing getting involved into this. I think we're getting some attention from some, sort of mainstream German and European attorneys who understand the need to protect religious freedom and parental rights and rights of conscience. As you see and hear what's happening in Europe, as people's consciences are being trampled, as in the United Kingdom you have street preachers being arrested, as you have counselors being fired for counseling people who may have same-sex attraction or things of that nature. It's just really quite frightening what's happening over there. So I'm very encouraged, by what is happening, the people who are getting interested. And I was over there this past weekend, and it was interesting. One of the attorneys, and we had a meeting of Catholic and Protestant attorneys, so this goes across the religious spectrum. Right. This one Catholic attorney looked at me and he said, as we were talking about the so-called culture war, and he said, "This isn't a war because we're hardly fighting. It's more like it's an invasion." Yeah. We're getting trounced. I had to look at him, and I'm like, he's got a point. Yeah. Exactly. But at least the faithful are showing up to the battle, and hopefully they're getting off the bench and getting their helmets on, their shoulder pads on, and they're running out into the field to do some of this work and fighting the good fight and engaging the battle for freedom. Yeah. Well, there are people getting more involved, and as things have gotten more serious, I think, Christians and people of conscience who understand that, if you want to live in a free society, it's not okay for the government to be able to tell you, what you can and can't do in a hospital room if it includes, aborting babies, and that violates your conscience. You can't be required to do that. Or if you don't want to take pictures, at a solemnization of a same-sex marriage, and that violates your conscience, you shouldn't have to do that. And that's something that happened here in the United States and New Mexico recently. So I'm encouraged by the kinds of people getting involved in these debates. And it's not just Christian, because over in Europe, there's a lot of non-Christians who homeschool, and they have a right to do that as well. Yeah. Let's talk about the Wunderlich family, and you've been out there, you've seen them. In fact, I just saw a picture of you standing next to them on WorldNet Daily, so proof that you've been there. But tell me a little bit about the family. This is a very dear Christian family. They are, all they want to do is follow God in their lives, and they've been called by God to homeschool their children. They take kind of a relaxed approach to home education, but they've done a very good job of it. In fact, there were tests that were done yesterday in the group home that were talked about in court today, where the people said, these children are pretty well educated, and
Good.
they're pretty well disciplined, and they're very nice children, and they're very good children, and obviously these children have not been mistreated in any way. And so this is a wonderful family following God's call to homeschool their children, and here they are in Germany having their children taken away for that very reason, just because they don't put their kids in the school.
The court arrived at a decision today. Why don't you just go over that just for a second?
The case today?
Yes.
Well, so 3 weeks ago, the German police stormed the home, took the kids, all because the parents just weren't sending their kids to school. And really, I think this was the German state saying, they're going to teach you a lesson about what it means to be a good German citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And today in court, that's exactly what the judge said. He said, Mr. Wunderlich, this is what Mr. Wunderlich told me when I talked to him on the phone earlier today. He said, we're going to give you a second chance to prove that you can be a good citizen. You will send your children to school if you want them back, basically is what he said.
Okay.
And the family had already agreed that they would do that. They had met with the school officials earlier in the week, came up with a plan and said, okay, you win. We don't like it. We don't agree with it, but it's the only choice we have.
Right.
We'll send our children to school.
We've got
So based on that agreement, the judge gave the children back today, which was a great thing, but they should never have been put in that position.
Right. And this hopefully will not be the end of home education in the nation of Germany. I mean, this is just,
Well, there's already been an end of it.
Yeah.
The Germans are trying to stamp it out. They think it creates what they call parallel societies. But this case and others that are happening right now, like a case, in the same state, hopefully will allow activists and people who love freedom to point out what Germany is doing and that they need to stop doing it. In this case I'm talking about is the case of the Scham family in northern Hesse, where they're facing 6-month jail sentences.
Incredible.
For homeschooling.
Incredible.
6 months in jail.
Wow.
This prosecutor wants to send these parents to jail for 6 months each because they haven't sent their kids to school.
It's a shame. It's a shame. I mean, this is one of the most egregious violations of parental freedoms, of liberty that I've seen in the Western world in probably, 600 years since the persecutions of Christians that was happening, in the 1500s and 1600s. This is the worst I think I've seen. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it certainly is bad. I mean, there have been a lot of violations of human rights all over the world in the last 600 years. But, for a government, a Western government, to say, we are going to decide how you educate your children, that is totalitarian.
Yeah.
If you can't educate your children according to your conscience, I mean, these are your children.
Mm-hmm.
Children are not born to the government. Children are born to a mother and a father. They're gifts from God, put in a family. That's God's design. And for the state to take over that responsibility and that authority is perverse. It's horrible, and it is an absolute violation of their human rights at the very highest level.
Yeah, and it's effectively the Orwellian state. It's the final cap on the Orwellian state. If they can capture your children and bring them into a totalitarian educational propaganda program and seal them off from their parents, that is the ultimate totalitarian state. It's exactly what Orwell wrote about in 1984. As the kids were, of course, turning in their parents and all the rest. This is the goal of the totalitarian state, and they've achieved it more or less in Germany. Thankfully, we have some freedoms here. But what are the Germans going to do? What are the Wunderlichs going to do from here on out?
Well, they're going to have to send their children to school for a period of time at least.
Okay.
And clearly they can't homeschool in Germany.
Yeah. But
right now they don't have legal custody of their children, so they really can't do much of anything.
Yeah.
They can't leave the country. The children's passports have been confiscated.
Mm-hmm.
We asked a question on our website today. Children's passports confiscated. Didn't the wall come down in 1989?
Yeah.
The Berlin Wall came down in 1989. Some say it didn't so much as come down as it moved to the west.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And, here's this family basically imprisoned in their own country over, their choice of education for their children, something that the rest of the Western world, or most countries in the West, America, Canada, UK, Ireland, France, tolerate quite well, homeschooling. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully these cases, the Scham case, the Wunderlich case, the Dudek case, other cases like this, will bring attention to the issue. And I can tell you that media in Germany are finally really starting to pay attention to this and are writing about it in not just a dismissive way, but they're actually starting to look at this, wondering, what are we doing here in Germany? Are we really doing the right thing? And so we're encouraged by that. We've been trying to work towards that end for years.
Mm-hmm.
And you hate that it has to be on the backs of tragedies like this, but we are so thankful to God that, it was only 3 weeks. There are cases like this in other parts of Germany where children have been kept for months at a time before they were returned to their families.
Okay. Is there any state where it's a little better than other states in Germany?
It's not so much state by state, although I will say that Hessen is one of the worst.
Okay.
There are some states like Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg where there are people who have been able to work out deals. I mean, when I say people, I mean like one or two people.
Okay.
Deals with local authorities to sort of ignore them, or they'll pay fines in exchange for being left alone. But that's it. It's not a pretty picture for homeschoolers in the Federal Republic of Germany.
What about Switzerland? Could they find another nation in which they could receive? I know they were at, I think someone said six nations. They've tried France, Norway, a few other nations. But about Switzerland, is there any other nation where they could find some kind of respite?
Well, they could if they could leave the country, and that's part of the problem. Right now, they can't leave without their children. I mean, they can't leave with their children because they don't have custody of their children. If they tried to take them out of the country, they would be hunted down as criminals and kidnappers and probably thrown in jail.
Yeah.
If they tried to do that. So before they can even think about leaving, they have to regain permanent custody of their kids. But once that happens, there are other countries they could go to. I mean, they could even come to the United States if they wanted to.
Right. Mike, on that note, how is this going to affect the Romeike case, do you think? Do you think at this point the White House will relent slightly, or the judicial system will relent slightly on the Romeike case?
I don't see this administration relenting at all.
Okay.
I wish I could say that they would, but I don't see that happening. They don't care. They don't care what happens to persecuted German homeschoolers. They're hostile to religion generally anyway, as obvious from their behavior and their policies. So I don't expect much relief from the White House. I think that this points out the need for granting asylum to families like the Romeikas.
That's for
sure. We're going to send that family back to Germany so they can endure this kind of torture, this kind of psychological oppression.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Yeah, it's rough. And hopefully America will somehow remain the home of the free, the land of the brave. But at this point, the Obama administration is not really helping in that regard. But I think we need to continue to fight ourselves. Tell the homeschoolers why this is important. Those who live in America, tell them why it's important to fight this battle in the European Union.
Kevin, if a Western country like Germany can get away with this sort of treatment of people like the Wunderlichs without our government or other Western governments even saying anything or trying to work on their behalf, it can easily jump over here. In fact, you and I both know that 30, 40 years ago, when the homeschooling movement in America was just getting started, this is exactly the kind of stuff that was happening to the pioneers of the homeschooling movement. You saw it in your own family, right. I'm sure, and the families around you. And folks, does history ever repeat itself? There's no reason to think that this couldn't happen here, and there are many voices that are talking about how it needs to happen here. Leading academics saying that public school should be the only option in a democratic society. And they even equate it to the need, or they equate the need for public education with the survival of democratic society.
And it's not
unbelievable.
It's not as if society has become less secular in the millennial generation, Mike. What we're seeing is increased Marxism, increased support for homosexuality, et cetera, amongst the millennial generation. They're much more likely to believe in evolution, et cetera, et cetera. So the millennial generation also in a social context is far more dysfunctional. I mean, you're looking at, 45% to 50% of these kids born outside of wedlock, and that's up from 6% when you and I were born in the 1960s and 1970s. So you're looking at a society that's far, far more dysfunctional. The family is far more broken down, and I think functional families in America will be far more persecuted by dysfunctional governments and systems that endorse dysfunctionality than we are today. I mean, I think that's going to happen just simply because of this increased secularization, the breakdown of the social fabric of the family in this country.
No, I think you're right, Kevin. And, the Lord told us that things would be like this in the latter days. And so it's no surprise that we're seeing these kinds of things. But we still have to stand for truth, stand for righteousness, and defend, people like the Wunderlichs and, prevent our families who homeschool and, families who want to follow their religious convictions from being persecuted.
We have to apply a full court press the whole way. We can't just let it happen, and we can't be discouraged in this. And Mike, something that I hope for in this country is amongst the first generation that squeaked out of the 1980s and 1990s, I'm hoping that there will be a much stronger force to defend freedom than there was in the previous generation, ergo the Joshua generation that Mike Ferris speaks of all the time. I know this is your belief, this is Mike Ferris's belief, this is his hope, that somehow in the first generation we produced something of a more fervent group of young men and young women who are willing to commit themselves to the battle for parental freedoms. What do you think? You think it's going to happen?
I sure hope so. I'll tell you, I work here at Patrick Henry College, and I see hundreds of young men and women, homeschool graduates, most of them, who are committed to that vision and who understand where our country came from, the firm foundation our country was built upon, which was the Word of God, and they want to see that restored.
Yeah.
Will they be successful? Well, only by God's grace, and we don't know what the future holds, but we do know that the war is won, and we have battles to fight as they come to us, and we'll fight them. I
think the battle will become increasingly intensive, but I think by God's providence, He has raised up a worthy minority of committed fighters who are willing to engage this age-old battle for freedom, which our forefathers fought very diligently for us against a big government and centralized governments that tyrannized our people early on. And I think we can do the same thing in our generation, and it doesn't take a majority to make a serious difference. I think we've proven that already by God's grace with the homeschooling movement and all the HSLDA has done since the 1980s and 1990s. But the next generation, it will be their deal to get out there and further the battle for freedom, even if the odds are even more against them than they were for us.
Absolutely right, Kevin, and it's a privilege. I know that you agree to be serving that community. They're an amazing community. Yeah. Homeschoolers are an amazing group of people, and they're the hope of our country. Just as Ron Paul says. Ron Paul himself, said that, and I agree with him. Yep,
in his farewell address. Yeah, he said he turned to something hopeful. He said, "I got to find something hopeful here." He said,
"Well, and he's out there actually trying to advance the cause." So that's he sees it, and I think he's right. And I think we're going to see. I think there is a chance that we could see some revival, and I think it is going to come from the homeschool movement. People who are free thinkers, who aren't indoctrinated. And it's going to be exciting to see how things unfold in the years to come.
And in the meantime, friends, it's our responsibility to continue to engage the battle wherever it shows itself. And certainly in the case of the Romaikis and the Wunderlichs and others, we need to engage. Stay close with HSLDA.org. That's Homeschool Legal Defense Association. You need to get their updates on a regular basis. It's HSLDA.org. Mike, how do they get your updates?
Go to HSLDA.org, and they can click on there's different things they can click on the homepage. Hopefully people can find out how they can sign up for updates. Yeah. Of course, the best thing they can do is click on the join button and support us with their membership. That's what we really need. We need members to support us with their prayers and their financial commitment as a member so that we can continue this fight.
And we just updated our membership. It lapsed for like a week, but my wife wrote the check. I just saw it yesterday, so we're good.
We appreciate that, Kevin. That's a great testimony of commitment. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We've been doing that for probably 15 years, but it's been a joy, and thank you so much for what you're doing for the cause of freedom, not just in America, but around the world, Mike.
It's a privilege to do it, Kevin. Thank you.
And you have been listening to the Generations Radio broadcast, my friends. If you'd like to interact with our program, email me at host@kevinswanson.com. And if you live in European nations in which there are persecutions against Christians, against homeschoolers, and you'd like to interact with the program, please email me directly at host@kevinswanson.com. We want to hear your stories. Again, my email address is host@kevinswanson.com. This is Kevin Swanson inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation.